The other day, I had my sweetest March of the Machines draft yet, and I figured should probably share it with y'all. So let's jump into it. Before we do, a quick reminder, if you want to do some drafting, you can snag all the cards you need from our sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. So we start off with a super easy first pick. Invasion of Fiora is a legit bomb in one of the best colors in March of the Machines Limited. If you look on 17 lands, you'll see it's in the top 5 for most first picked rares, and in the top quarter of rares as far as win rate, so we snap it off, don't even think twice about it. Nothing even comes close to competing with it. Pack 2 is a lot tougher. The rare's gone. There's no obviously great black or blue cards. So after thinking for a while, eventually go with Invasion of Urgamon, thinking this might set us up for some sort of Jund or even 5-color battle pile. Pack 3 is where things start to get a little bit wild. The pack is okay, there's a Forest Cycler which we could use, Invasion of Arcadia fits the battle theme, but Artistic Refusal is a really strong card. It's nowhere near our colors, but I decided so far we haven't had a lot of success in March of the Machines drafts, so what if we just take the strongest card each pack and try to figure out how to make the mana work later and trust that our deck's going to be really strong if we get to cast our cards. At this point, we have a double blue card, a double black card, a green red card, so when a Blighted Burgeoning pops up, it is a super easy pick. If we're committing to this like 5-ish color pile, we want as many of these as possible to fix our mana, and the Incubate's kind of a nice bonus too. If we weren't already committed to the 5-color plan, pack 4 is where we go all in. We get past a Niv Mizzet Reborn, and people forget that Niv is actually a legit bomb if you can cast it. Like, sure, you're probably not drawing 5 cards or something like you would in Constructed, but a 6/6 flyer for 5 that ETB draws you a card or 2 cards, that is a ridiculous bomb in Limited. So we snap it off, and from this point on, we're going to be focused on value, 5-color piles, and mana fixing to see if we can make this plan work. Over the next few picks, we snap off some fixing. We get a Forest Cycler, which is the most important cycler because it turns on our green fixing. We grab a Halo Forger, mostly because it works with Niv. Negate, I think, is actually super strong in this format because it hits battles, which are all over the place. We get a late dual land, and we'll take as many of those as possible, and then we get super lucky to get another Blighted Burgeoning in pack 10. So that's a pretty good sign that no one else is trying to build a 5-color pile, because if you're trying to build a deck like we are, that card is a super high pick. We would snap first pick a Blighted Burgeoning, assuming there wasn't some sort of like 5-color bomb in the deck. From pick 11 on, there's nothing that's going to make our deck, so we pick the literal draft chaff and move on to pack number 2. Pack number 2, we are rewarded for our greed, opening an Omnath Locust of All, which, much like Niv, is a bomb if you can cast it, and we're building our deck with the idea being that we're going to be able to cast it. A little bit sad to pass up on the land, and the Invasion of Perulia would actually be really sweet in the deck, but Omnath is just absolutely perfect for a 5-color value pile. Now that we have 2 5-color 5-mana bombs, we really got to focus on fixing. So we look past Subversion and Phyrexian Awakening, 2 strong standalone cards, focusing on Skittering Surveyor or Invasion of Ixalan, cards that fix our mana, and in the end, decide that Invasion of Ixalan is just better since it puts the land into our hand rather than putting it on the top of our deck. So even though it doesn't read as fixing, it actually is really solid mana fixing for a deck like this. Next pick, I think we probably make a mistake. Outside of Invasion of Fiora, our deck is pretty removal light, so Tandem Takedown was probably the best choice, but instead we go with Kahira the Orphan Guard on the theory that it kind of synergizes with our 5-mana bombs. It's a 2-color card, so Niv can find it. It pumps elementals, so it grows our Omnath, but in the end, probably would have been better to have the removal spell. Pack 4, we remain irresponsible, passing Cosmic Hunger, another removal spell, to take a Modi, which just seems super fun thanks to its Cascade ability. We already got 3 6-drops, and hopefully we snag some more land cyclers, so our deck seems like it should really be able to take advantage of its ability. The next 2 picks, we just snap up dual lands, which might not seem that exciting, but are actually going to be pretty essential to let us cast our 5-color cards. While fixing is a priority, maybe go a little bit too far here with Urn of Godfire, which is like super horrible fixing, although at least the pack isn't great, although the Rada could have been solid as a 4-drop that does work with Niv. Neither of our next 2 picks, a Stormclaw Rager and a second Urn of Godfire, actually end up making our deck, but we do snag a couple more goodies before pack 2 ends, with a Tidal Terror, which is some nice fixing as an island cycler, also works with a Modi, and then Unseal the Necropolis, which might seem weird in our deck, but considering we have two super important cards, Niv Mizzet Reborn, Omnath, Locust of All, and our opponent's gonna try to kill those, having a way to get them back from the graveyard and reuse them actually seems like it could be pretty strong in our deck. After that, it's just a bunch of draft chaff heading into pack 3. So at this point, outside of more fixing and any bombs that we open, we really need some removal. We're super duper light on removal. So we're pretty happy to see Voldarin Thrillseeker, which is technically a weird take on a removal spell that works with Seal the Necropolis. So not a true bomb, but a really solid addition to our deck. Pack 3, pick 2, we continue to be as greedy as possible. There's a Skittering Surveyor to fix our mana. There's Clear Shot and Vanquish the Weak for our desperately needed removal. But I just can't resist the Realm Breaker. I mean, technically it is ramp, right? And also fixing, depending on the lands in our opponent's deck. We can mill them and steal them, so I'm pretty sure this was the wrong pick, but boy is it a fun one. Next up, we snag Land Cycler number 3, and the Land Cyclers are arguably bombs in our deck. They fix our mana, which we need. They're big threats, and they cascade with Emoti, which is kind of ridiculous. After that, we think about taking an Abash and look at our curve, which does have some odds, like double damage with Niv Mizzet or Omnath is kind of ridiculous, but another Artistic Refusal is just too sweet to pass up. After that, Invasion of Urgamon, technically fixing and ramp. Like in our dream world here, we can Urgamon on turn 2 to make a treasure and hopefully get down in Omnath on turn 3 or a Niv Mizzet Reborn on turn 4, which is kind of ridiculous. After that, it's Land Cyclers 4 and 5 and one more dual land. So we get up to 4 duels. I kind of wish we had like 6+ duels, but 4 is not horrible. And then for the rest of the pack, we just take stuff that we're not going to play. So after making a couple of tough cuts, our deck ends up looking like this, which I will say by far the sweetest deck I've drafted so far in March of the Machines draft. And our deck has some stuff going for it. Like there's a lot of raw power. Niv is busted. Omnath is busted. We did get a lot of fixing. Little disappointed we didn't find more dual lands, and we only got 2 Blighted Burgeonings, both in pack 1. I'm surprised we didn't hit at least one more throughout the draft. But when you count the Invasion of Urgamon, Invasion of Ixalan, Realm Breaker, all of our weird fixing, hopefully our mana is going to be good enough to cast our stuff consistently. On the other hand, our deck is not without some issues. Like, we are pretty light on removal. We got an Atraxas Fall, a Negate, and then the Invasion of Fiora, but that's really not a ton. I guess Voldarin Thrillseeker as well, but we're pretty light on removal, and our curve is kind of scarily high when it comes to creatures. Our curve is fine if you count our battles, but if you look at our creatures in specific, we're probably not adding a creature to the battlefield until turn 3 for sure, and we only have 2 3-drop creatures, so it might be more like turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, so there might be a tendency to kind of get run over by aggro, especially if our opponent's on the play, but hopefully our immense amount of raw power will make up for it. So anyway, that's the draft, that's the deck. Let's jump into the games and see how this pile actually plays. So game 1 is basically all of our worries about the deck come to life. We keep a hand with no green mana, only 2 colors of mana, which that's on us, maybe a punt on our part to not mulligan for something that had better fixing. And our opponent's on the play, and our opponent has a pretty good curve out, a 2-drop into 3-drop into another 2-drop, one of them being a Finn with 2 Death Touch creatures, so we pretty quickly get up to 8 poison counters, and eventually we are able to use Invasion of Urgamon to fix our mana and get an Omnath down, but we're already so far behind by the time the Omnath hits the battlefield. Even a Voldarin Thrillseeker is not really enough to catch us back up, and our opponent, with a little bit of removal and just being way more aggressive than we are, is able to close out the game. Game 2 starts off looking like more of the same. Our opponent wins the die roll. They start with a 1-drop, and we're like, oh no, not again. Maybe our deck's not as sweet as it looks. We again keep a hand without green mana, although this time we do have every other color of mana we might need. Plus, we have the mighty Urn of Godfire to fix our mana. Most importantly, we have a Voldarin Thrillseeker this game, which does a great job at slowing down our opponent's aggressive start. Eventually, after slowing down our opponent's attack, attacks, it gets to snipe a creature in response to a Crystal Carapace, which is a huge swing. And then, even better, the next turn, we get to a Modi, and we cascade into an Unseal the Necropolis to get back the Voldaren Thrillseeker. So yeah, we end up having to trade off the Modi, which is a little bit sad, but not before we get to cascade a second time with Artistic Refusal countering a removal spell, which is just a huge swing. So even though we're down to 8 life and on an empty board, our hand is just ridiculously full of busted Magic cards. So we managed to clean up the rest of our opponent's board over the course of a couple turns, use Invasion of Fiora to sweep away our opponent's last big threat, and at this point, we're able to start flipping battles, and things just get out of control for our opponent. Once the Invasion of Fiora flips, it's pretty much over. Our opponent has one last gasp attempt. It's staying in the game by playing a couple of flyers, but we managed to find a Niv, which spins into a Halo Forger, and once our opponent realizes that their flyers aren't going to be able to get our life total to 0, they scoop it up with Niv's ability on the stack. In game 3, we finally get to see our deck do what we wanted it to do. Our hand starts off with no bombs, but that's fine. Our mana is literally perfect, and we got 2 Invasion of Urgamons for ramping and filtering. Opponent starts with an Invasion of Ixalan, which has an outsized impact on the early game here, but we draw into a Omnath off of our first Urgamon, and we can get down our first 5-color bomb on turn number 4, and an unchecked Omnath just takes over a game with card advantage. Sadly, our opponent tries to flip their battle, and we decide that we actually got to trade off the Omnath to not fall too far behind on board, in large part because we know we can get it back with Necropolis anyway. Next turn, pretty much a setup turn to develop our mana, making it even more perfect with some land cycling and a Bladed Burgeoning. Plus, we want the land cycler in the graveyard so we can get it back the following turn. Opponent keeps developing their board, and now we get to start doing sweet things. So we actually have enough mana that we can unseal the Necropolis and play Omnath from our graveyard, assuming we manage to tap our mana properly, which is a bit of a challenge, but things get even better. We unseal, we mill 3, and we hit a Niv, so we get back Omnath and Niv, both of our 5-color mobs, and at this point, we're feeling pretty good. We're drawing 2 cards a turn, we got a Niv in hand, we got a negate if anything goes wrong, so our opponent, if you want to, you can flip your battle now. We're not going to risk our Omnath at this point, so opponent gets to flip, but that is perfectly fine. We start drawing extra cards, we get down our Niv to draw even more cards, and now we just have so much power on the battlefield. It's going to be hard for our opponent to get back into it. They try with a removal spell, but the negate comes through again. Negate's been so incredibly good this draft, and now that we're flipping battles and drawing 2 cards a turn, it's hard to imagine our opponent getting back into the game in an Invasion of Fiora Plague Wind style to sweep away our opponent's non-legendary creatures and keep our 2 5-color legends. Pretty much seals the deal. At this point, we have everything we could want. We're flipping Fiora. Our opponent actually can kill the Omnath, and we just let it go. It doesn't even really matter at this point. We're so far ahead. So now we get Marchesa. We have more Urgamons. We got a counter in hand in case our opponent has a bomb, and it's hard to see how we can actually lose the game. And this is why you play the 5-color value deck. Like, if you can stabilize and get to this point, it is the most ridiculous thing you can do at draft. We get into huge attack, we flip more battles, and then eventually we're like, I guess we might as well play this Realm Breaker, and our opponent apparently doesn't like getting milled and scoops it up. Game 4 might be the most ridiculous match of non-cube limited I've ever played. So we lose the die roll. Our opponent gets off to, I would say, a pretty fast start. Not only a 1-drop on the play, but Ragavan, and we are freaking out. We have no early game blockers, so this Ragavan just gets to go off. Ragavan not even good in limited, but if you play it on turn 1 on the play, it is absurd. Opponent gets in 2 hits, makes 2 treasures. Thankfully, there's no follow-up. They're just saving up their treasures. So we get down a Thrillseeker to stop the beats for now, and we're like, okay, maybe we're good. Maybe we take the 2 hits. Our opponent didn't develop their board more. We can actually start attacking our battles since we can sack the Thrillseeker to get rid of the Ragavan. Our opponent tries to attack with Ragavan. We deal with it with the Incubate. We're like, oh, this is great. Okay, we took the hits. We're good. Our opponent, though, follows up with the best card in the format, Etali, which isn't just an Etali. It's an Etali that spins into our Niv. So our opponent suddenly has, like, a lethal board out of the blue. Thankfully, we have an answer. Our pack 1, pick 1, Invasion of Fiora can come down, and hilariously, all of our opponent's creatures are legends. So we get to keep our Thrillseeker, start working towards flipping our Fiora, which can flip our other battles, and Now we're like, oh my god, are we going to survive? Turn 1 Ragavan, double hit, into a tally, into steal our Niv, and it's starting to look like we're actually somehow, some way winning this game. Unfortunately, our opponent's deck is actually pretty good. They have a bunch of removal. We end up sacking the Thrill Seeker to get a Marchesa to hopefully flip our other battles in the future. We lose our Emoti, which didn't get to do much work, and then our opponent, of course, Invasion of Chandelar, so they get back all their bombs from the graveyard. Again, the Itali's back, the Ragavan's back. We keep flipping battles. We get to churn through our deck. These Invasion of Urgamons are actually pretty absurd because we can flip them and tutor up more battles, so we build a pretty impressive board as well as we get pretty much every battle out of our deck, and we got the Omnath in hand, but we need to leave up this artistic refusal because we cannot let our opponent resolve the Itali. Like, they can do anything else they want, but Itali is not acceptable. Ragavana, sure. Pump your creature, sure. We don't care. We also have Realmbreaker to start milling, and we get a little concerned that we're starting to run a bit low on cards. This game has been so long and so grindy that there's actually a chance that we mill out. Marchesa's drawing us an extra card each turn. We're going to get down our Omnath, which also draws us an extra card each turn. And remember, these are not May abilities. So now we're drawing 3 cards a turn, which seems great. We want to draw as many cards as possible, but we start to worry in the back of our minds, oh no, are we going to actually just like straight up run out of cards here? Are we going to mill ourselves out of this game? Opponent, Itali number 2. Thankfully, we have the counter, and because we're super greedy, we draw some extra cards anyway, even though we're afraid of milling out. So we draw 3 cards for our turn. All of them lands. We do find another counter though. We get down our Urn, which is actually kind of good as removal since we have so many lands. We get down an Invasion of Ixalan, which finds nothing of note really. We start counting like, oh man, is there anything we can do with this Halo Forger? What do we have in the graveyard? And there's really no good targets. We do get to get in with Marchesa and remove the counters from our opponent's creatures and trade off with both of them thanks to Death Touch. So we're in pretty fine shape. There's a Zada. Zada though without other creatures is fine. Rada, okay, Zada with 2 creatures is still kind of fine. So we just mill our opponent and we're starting to think, okay, how do we close out this game before we run out of cards? Like, that's becoming a real concern. There's like 5 cards left in our deck. We have 2 turns because we're drawing twice with Omnath, which we can't get rid of at the moment. How do we kill our opponent before we mill ourselves out? That's what this game came down to, this insane Ragavan Italian Invasion of Fiora game. So we use some removal on a creature. We swing with the team, get in, hit our opponent down to 10. And what we're really playing towards here is we know we still have the ability to get creatures back from our graveyard in our deck. One of our 5 cards is our double Raise Dead effect. So what we're playing for is raising dead the Voldaren Thrill Seeker and hopefully throwing it at our opponent's face for lethal, likely the turn before we die to milling out. So we need to get our opponent low enough on life that we can close out the game in the next 2 turns with the help of Thrill Seeker. Our opponent just runs out some blockers. Opponent's clearly trying to mill us out. We draw our Unseal the Necropolis, so we have our line set up. Can we get our opponent low enough on life? We Realmbreaker our opponent, mill a few cards. Our opponent is getting low on cards too, but they have enough that we can't quite mill them out before we will mill out. And then we're like, okay, how do we do this? What are our options? So there's a Fertilid's Favor in the graveyard. Somehow, pretty much both of our entire decks are in the graveyard and there's no good targets for Halo Forger. So we run out the Halo Forger, which is important here just because it's a flyer. So we Halo Forger, think for a while, end up putting the counters on the Omnath. If the Omnath dies, we're kind of okay with it because we get an extra turn and stop drawing so many cards. So we swing with the crew. Our opponent going to chump and block, drops to 7, and we're like, okay, we're good now. We should be good. So we untap. Our opponent runs out of Cami, no problem. So we untap, we draw extra card, 1 card left in our library, a single card. We unseal the Necropolis, mill the rest of our deck, get back to Thrill Seeker, back up the Halo Forger, hit you for 5, swing the rest of the team for whatever, doesn't really matter. And then we sack the Halo Forger and close out what is probably the wildest game of March of the Machines Limited that has ever taken place. What an amazing epic game. What a great format. Just so sweet all around. In typical Magic fashion, we go from our deck's best game, and one of the best games in Limited I think I've ever seen, to our deck's worst game. We keep a hand with all blue and green mana, thinking, oh, we'll get there eventually, and we very much did not get there eventually. Somehow throughout the course of this game, we end up with 10 lands on the battlefield. At the very end, we get a Plains from our opponent's deck with Realmbreaker, but other than that Plains, we just never hit anything but blue and green lands. We hit our Simic Dual land, we drew every island in our deck, we drew, I believe, every forest or almost every forest in our deck, but just none of the other colors of mana, which is definitely unlucky. At the same time, it is also a cost of building the 5-color pile. So the last game, we got to see just the obscene power of being full 5 colors, where we have counters and we have these 5-color legends and we got Wraths. This game, we get to see the drawback, which is sometimes your mana doesn't work out and you go through an entire game doing literally nothing. Thankfully, the next game, things are looking a little better. We got 3 colors of mana and green mana along with double Invasion of Urgamon. So pretty easy keep. And we get to see one of our decks, I guess, weirder nut draws, where we get down a turn 2 Invasion of Urgamon. Our opponent appears to be playing mono red, which is weird. You don't see too many mono color decks in this limited format, so kind of a rarity to see someone straight up mono red. On turn 3, we get to play another Invasion of Urgamon, and all of a sudden we're like, wow, we have a lot of mana super quickly. Our opponent really isn't doing much of anything. They land cycle, they hit us for 2 damage and incubate. We untap and draw a hasty Furnace Host Charger, which just happens to be a perfect way to flip a battle. So we get to get in turn 4, we start flipping our Invasion of Urgamons. We get the Cliff Charger. This lets us get more Urgamons, and at this point, the snowball is just unbeatable. Our opponent spends their turn like transforming into a 1/1, and we're almost feeling a little bad at just how far ahead we are at this point. There's just no way our opponent's mono red deck is coming back from this. We flip another Invasion of Urgamon, we tutor up even more battles, and our opponent, they stick it out for a couple of minutes, but they are like just so far behind so quickly because of essentially the fast mana from Invasion of Urgamon that there's just no way they can get back in the game. And once we stick 2 more battles, they scoop it up. So at this point, we're actually feeling pretty good about where we're at. We're 4-2 going into round 7. And one of our losses was that weird game where we only drew Simic mana. So we're thinking if we can just run average for a few rounds, we might be able to run this deck up to 7 wins. Our opponent starts with a 1-drop. We have a pretty decent hand, but the big play of this game is turn 2, where opponent sticks Invasion of Gabakhan. Invasion of Gabakhan in the Thoughtseize mode doesn't really matter. We can play through that. The bigger issue is our deck doesn't really have cheap removal or early blockers, so our opponent might be able to flip this, and if they can flip the Gabakhan, they're just going to snowball their team hard with +1/+1 counters, and we probably won't be able to beat it. So on turn 3, we have a really tough decision to make. We untap and draw Voldaren Thrillseeker, which we could run out just to try to block and defend the battle. The other option is to run out the 2 Invasion of Urgamons and set up for the future. The problem with Thrillseeker here is if we run it out and our opponent has a pump spell or removal, we just lose it. It gets so much better if we can have a mana available to sacrifice it as removal. So we take the maybe greedy line of playing both Invasion of Urgamons. Plus remember, our opponent only has a 1/2 and their battles at 2 defense counters, so they shouldn't be able to flip it anyway. But our opponent untaps, has another backup creature, and flips the Gabakhan to start snowballing with +1/+1 counters. We get to play a turn 4 Niv Mizzet Reborn, which should be absurd, just this huge 6/6 flyer. Even though it doesn't draw us a card, it still should be great, but I'm not convinced we can get through this Invasion of Gabakhan. Our opponent swings with their team to get counters and blinks the thing we block to keep it alive. So things are looking pretty sketchy. We untap and get to flip one of our Invasion of Urgamons to get a Taruga Cliff Charger to find an Invasion of Ixalan, thinking that if we can find black mana or Invasion of Fiora and get rid of this Light Shield Array, that's our way back into the game. We're going to need this Wrath eventually. The painful part is, post-combat main phase, we decide that we need to Voldaren Thrillseeker, backing up our 6/6 Niv Mizzet Reborn to throw it at a 1-drop to try to get it off the battlefield. It puts our opponent in a position where either they let it go and lose lose the 5/6 1-drop, which is fine with us, or at least we get rid of the Light Shield array, so that would turn on the Wrath in the future as a potential out to this situation. Our opponent chooses to sack the Invasion of Gabakhan. They keep their big creature. During their turn, they swing out again. They have more pump spells. They end up wrathing away our board, and then they follow up with a Knight of the New Coalition to add 4 more power to the battlefield, and at this point, we're just too far behind. We can unseal the Necropolis to get back our Thrill Seeker, and we get an Emoti, but our opponent just swings with a massive team, hits us to 5. We run out of Emoti just for fun, thinking, oh, who knows what we could hit, but there's nothing in our deck that can get us out of this situation, and we end up finishing the run with a 4-3. So that's our draft for today. 2 quick notes on the way out the door. Number 1, if you get a chance to draft 5-color in March of the Machines, I would say go for it, because as far as I'm concerned, it is the most fun archetype you can get into. So if you see that early Niv or Omnath or Invasion of Alara, snap it off, draft all the fixing, and then set yourself up so in pack 2 and pack 3 you can take all the sweet bombs and just do all the ridiculous things. Don't be afraid to commit and go for it, because it is just so much fun. Second, I would say this deck is maybe a 6.5, or if we're generous, a 7 out of 10 example of 5-color. If you look at our 3 losses, we lost in 2 ways. One is that weird game where we just drew all Simic lands, and I think that's just variance. Like, our fixing was pretty good. Throughout our matches, we didn't really have a ton of mana trouble with the deck. I think your fixing can always be better, but I was really happy with the amount of fixing that we have, so I will write that one off as just variance. The other way we lost, though, was 2 aggro decks, and that is really on us for not having enough removal or early game creatures, and I think that was really just some choices that we made, picking fun cards like Realm Breaker over maybe a functional card like a removal spell. But still, I'm happy with how the deck turned out, and I had an absolute blast playing it. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it. If you want even more Magic, make sure to check out our video about the biggest cheaters in the history of Magic, or maybe the one where we count down and rank every single win the game card in the history of Magic.